Hey, so I was watching over some of my old reading videos and I noticed that the audio was a bit soft. So for me to hear myself, I had to turn my volume up, and I realized that it's probably not idea to have quiet audio. So I tweaked some of the settings in my computer and fiddled around. Hopefully this one's a better volume, because I don't want you guys falling asleep. I know my voice is soothing. I don't want you taking a nap in the middle of my reading. Okay. So when we left off with chapter 12, some guy came up and he grabbed Nancy's arm, and he was this rough looking guy, and we have no clue who he was. Alright? Also, there's this loud bird outside my window. I don't know what his deal is, but he's been chirping away all hours of the day, just living his best life. So if you hear him, I can't help him. Alright, so chapter 13, The Law Takes Over. "Let go of me," Nancy cried out, and tried to shake off the man's iron grip. When she did not succeed, Bess and George started pounding the man and forced him to release Nancy's arm. "What do you want?" Nancy demanded indignantly. "Some information. Why are you snooping around here?" the stranger snarled. "Are you a factory guard?" Nancy countered, knowing from his clothes and manner that he most certainly was not. "Why, yes, that's what I am. And I got a right to know why you've been talking to that workman." "The conversation was private," Nancy told the man firmly. "Now, if you'll just move." For a moment, the obnoxious stranger did not seem inclined to do so, but finally he strode off down the street. The girl stepped into the car and drove away. "Nancy, aren't you worried?" Bess asked. "That man was positively horrible." "Yes, I am, Bess, because I'm more certain than ever that Joe Swenson is in some kind of jam." "If we can see him at 4 o'clock, I'm going to ask him about that crude person," declared George. "Say, Nancy, where are you going now?" "Yes, where?" Bess echoed. "I'm starving." Nancy laughed. "I could use some lunch myself. After that, I'll introduce myself to Phil Roberts' father." "The Stanford postmaster?" Bess exclaimed. "Nancy, you're not transferring your affections from Ned to Phil already." "Nothing like that," Nancy assured her with a grin. "I have a little scheme I'd like to try out, and I need his cooperation." Nancy stopped speaking as she drove into a public parking lot next to a tea room. The girls went inside and were fortunate to be seated at the last available table. It was such a noisy place that the girls did not try to talk. So a tea room, it's like a cafe but for tea. Would you guys want to go to one? We should just go to a tea room. We'll have tea together. We'll sit and chit chat. Maybe that'll be my new YouTube videos. I'll just drink tea and chat at you. It'll be my new series. Tea time with Miss L. Okay, sorry. Half an hour later, they came out of the tea room, glad to breathe the fresh air and escape the din. Since the post office was close by, the girls walked there, seeing a door sign marked "Private, Postmaster." Nancy went to it and knocked. Presently it was opened by a pleasant, middle-aged man. "I'm Nancy Drew from River Heights," she said, smiling. "I met your son Phil at a party." "Oh, yes, Phil told me. Won't you come in?" After the girls had entered and the door had been closed, Nancy introduced her friends. "I've come on an unusual errand, Mr. Roberts," Nancy said. "A man I know who works at Stanford Electronics has sent 2 letters containing money orders from here. Neither has been received. Probably all your employees are above suspicion, but would you mind if I make a little experiment?" The postmaster smiled. "What kind of experiment?" "I'll mail a note to the man's wife with a money order in it from your office," Nancy explained. "Could you possibly find out if that letter is sent out from here?" Mr. Roberts looked intently at Nancy. "You're a very ingenious young lady," he remarked, "and if the letter does leave here, then you'll check with the receiving post office to find out if it has reached there?" "Yes, the family of this man is desperately in need of receiving money from him. I'm trying to help them." "And I'll help too," the postmaster said suddenly. "Now will you please give me the name and address of this woman?" Nancy took Joe Swenson's unsealed envelope from her purse, and Mr. Roberts copied the 2 names and addresses on it. As he handed it back, he said, "Mail this at once." Then he added, "If you come back in a couple of hours, I'll have a report for you, after I personally examine all the outgoing mail bags." "I'll be here," Nancy thanked the postmaster, and the 3 girls went into the main lobby. There Nancy bought the $25 money order, kept the purchaser's receipt, and tucked the other section, properly filled out, into the letter. Then she sealed the envelope and slipped the letter into the nearby slot. When the girls reached the street, Bess said, "That was a daring thing to do, Nancy. Suppose the letter is intercepted and the money order cashed by some unscrupulous person. If that happens, I'll make good on the money. Right now, tell me, where are we going to spend 2 hours? George suggested attending a movie across the street, and the girls went into the theater. They became so interested in the historical mystery film that the time flew by. The feature ended just as the 2 hours were up, and the girls hurried back to Mr. Roberts' office. Again he opened the door. The postmaster was not alone. A policeman stood guarding a man who sat dejectedly in a chair, his face in his hands. He looked up at Nancy, hate blazing in his eyes. The money order clerk. Nancy Drew, thank you for leading us to this thief, the postmaster said. Ralph Ringman has confessed to taking not only the letter you mailed, but all money orders of any size. He has 2 accomplices, a man and a woman, who go to various towns and cash the money orders. I'm not the only employee in on this deal, Ringman cried out. Mr. Roberts smiled. I figured that might be the case and have notified other postmasters who have had complaints of undelivered money orders to try the same ruse that Nancy Drew suggested. At that moment the phone rang. Mr. Roberts answered it. Yes, Clyde. You did? Good. I guess that little racket is over with. When he hung up, Mr. Roberts reported to the others that Ringman's outside accomplices had just been arrested by the police and had confessed their parts in the scheme. On a hunch, Nancy told about the rough-looking man who had questioned her. Was he in league with Ralph Ringman? She asked the postmaster. So here we go. There's Ralph Ringman, Nancy, the cops, Bess and George, and the caption says, Nancy Drew, thank you for leading us to this thief, said the postmaster. So the rough-looking guy is the one who grabbed her, who said he was a security guard, but he was clearly not. So she asked if he was in on it. That's right, Mr. Roberts turned to the prisoner. You'll be interested to hear that your pal meant to double-cross you. He planned to hold up Swenson at the plant and grab Swenson's money for himself. Just as he was about to emerge from his hiding place in the shrubbery nearby, Miss Drew and her friends came along. When he overheard the conversation about the stolen mail, he got panicky. That's why he followed Miss Drew and accused her of snooping. That low-down sneak, snarled Ringman. Mr. Roberts said that the man from the Postal Inspector's Division would take custody of the prisoner. By the way, he said to Nancy, do you still want Mr. Swenson's letter sent? Yes, if it's safe. I'll give the money order receipt to him. Nancy glanced at her watch. We must hurry, she said. Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Please give my regards to Phil. The girls hurried off. At a traffic light, they paused, waiting for it to turn green. Behind them stood 2 men conversing in low voices. Where'd you get the tip? One asked. From Ray Bolt's wife. She said the man who set fire to the house had an appointment with him there that evening. I heard he ran away. Where'd he go? Nobody knows, but we tracked him here. He's working at the electronics factory under assumed name. What is it? We don't know, but we have the man's description. We'll have him in jail by tonight. Nancy, Bess, and George hardly breathed during this recital. Did these men mean Joe Swenson? Uh-oh, so they might be going to arrest Mr. Swenson, because he's under the name of Mr. Dahl, which is his mother's maiden name, so he's under a false name. Uh-oh, it's not looking good for Mr. Swenson. And remember, we're hoping he's innocent. But we'll have to see. All right, I'll see ya.